Title: This morning the doors to our apartment complex were welded shut. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins at first, everyone thought it was maintenance. A temporary safety measure. Something routine. But by the time the sun fully rose, every exit in the apartment complex had been sealed shut from the outside. No warnings. No announcements. No explanation. And when people tried to call for help, they realized something far worse than being trapped. No one outside was coming back. The apartment complex had always been ordinary in a way that made it forgettable. It stood in the middle of a quiet suburban block, surrounded by identical buildings and narrow streets that rarely saw heavy traffic. Most of the residents kept to themselves. People came and went without much interaction, living separate lives stacked on top of each other. Nothing about the place suggested danger. That was what made the change so difficult to understand. It started early in the morning before most residents had fully woken up. The sky was still gray, caught between night and sunrise when the first signs appeared. A faint metallic smell lingered in the hallways. It was subtle enough that most people ignored it at first, blending into the usual odors of old pipes and recycled air. But as the morning progressed, the scent became stronger, sharper, like heated metal cooling too quickly. Some residents noticed it when they stepped into the corridors. Others noticed it when they opened their windows and found the air outside strangely still. There were no construction vehicles parked nearby. No workers. No noise. Just silence. By the time the sun began to rise, the first real discovery was made. The front entrance had been sealed. The heavy glass doors that led to the street were no longer transparent. Thick metal sheets had been welded across them from the outside, covering the entire frame. The edges of the metal were rough and uneven, fused directly into the structure of the building. From the inside, it looked as though the doors had simply been erased. A small crowd gathered in the lobby, drawn by confusion more than fear. People examined the metal plating, touching it cautiously as if expecting it to still be warm. It wasn't. Whatever had been done to the doors had happened hours earlier. No one had seen it happen. No one had heard anything. Someone checked the emergency exit near the stairwell. It had been sealed too. The metal there was thicker, reinforced with additional layers that covered not just the door but part of the surrounding wall. The realization spread quickly after that. Every exit in the building had been closed off. Not locked. Not barricaded. Welded shut. The hallways filled with movement as residents moved from floor to floor, checking doors, windows, anything that might offer a way out. But every access point led to the same result. Solid metal. Unbroken. Permanent. Panic did not arrive immediately. At first, people assumed it was some kind of mistake. A misunderstanding. An extreme but temporary safety measure that would be explained soon. Someone tried calling building management. No response. Others tried local authorities. The calls connected. But no one answered. That was when the situation began to shift from confusion into something heavier. Something more unsettling. The phones worked. The signal was strong. But every call rang endlessly into silence. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed. Cars passed occasionally on the distant street. A few pedestrians walked by without slowing down. No one looked toward the building. No one reacted to the sealed doors. It was as if the apartment complex had been removed from their awareness. Inside, the atmosphere began to change. The metallic smell grew stronger. It seeped through the vents and settled into the walls, mixing with the stale air until it became impossible to ignore. Residents began closing their apartment doors, retreating into their own spaces, trying to create some sense of control. But the building itself felt different now. Quieter. Not the natural quiet of a calm morning, but something deeper. A silence that seemed to press inward from all directions. By midday, attempts to break through the exits had already begun. Tools were gathered. Improvised efforts were made to pry at the metal plating, to weaken the welds, to create even the smallest opening. Nothing worked. The metal had been fused with unnatural precision. There were no weak points. No seams that could be exploited. It was as if the exits had been sealed with the intention of never being opened again. The first real fear surfaced when someone tried to access the roof. The stairwell door leading upward had also been sealed. But this time, the metal plating extended across the ceiling as well, covering the entire upper exit in a solid barrier that showed no signs of manual installation. It didn't look welded. It looked formed. As if it had grown there. That was when people began to realize this wasn't normal. This wasn't construction. This wasn't an accident. Something had been done to the building. Something deliberate. As the hours passed, the atmosphere inside grew heavier. The lights flickered occasionally, though the power never fully went out. The ventilation system continued running, but the air it circulated felt wrong. Thicker. Harder to breathe. The metallic scent had changed into something more distinct now. Something that carried a faint, almost organic undertone. Residents began reporting strange details. Small things at first. Objects slightly out of place inside their apartments. Doors that felt heavier than before. Walls that seemed colder to the touch. Nothing that could be proven. Nothing that made sense. But enough to build tension. By late afternoon, a new pattern emerged. The hallways began to empty. People stopped gathering. Stopped talking. Each resident retreated further into isolation, driven by an unspoken understanding that something about the building was no longer safe. The sense of being watched grew slowly. Not from outside, but from within. The structure itself began to feel alive in a way that was impossible to explain. Subtle shifts could be felt through the floors, like distant movements traveling through the foundation. The walls occasionally produced faint vibrations, too irregular to be mechanical, too deliberate to be random. And then the first disappearance happened. No one saw it directly. One of the residents simply stopped responding. His apartment door was found slightly open. Inside, everything appeared normal. Lights on. Furniture untouched. No signs of struggle. But he was gone. Completely. The search that followed revealed nothing. No hidden exits. No broken walls. No explanation. Only the growing certainty that whatever had sealed the building had not done so to keep people out. It had sealed them in. As night approached, the building grew colder. The temperature dropped slowly, steadily, without any change in the heating system. Breath began to fog faintly in the air, even inside closed apartments. The metallic smell intensified again, but now it carried something else. Something unmistakable. Something that no one wanted to identify. The walls began to change. At first, it was only visible in certain lighting. Subtle distortions in the surface. Lines that hadn't been there before. Shapes that looked almost organic, stretching faintly beneath the paint as if something was moving behind it. Residents who noticed it tried to ignore it. Tried to convince themselves it was stress, exhaustion, fear. But the changes continued. Slow, deliberate, unavoidable. By the time darkness fully settled outside, the building no longer felt like a place designed for living. It felt contained. Like something had been sealed away long before the residents had ever arrived. And whatever had been trapped inside had finally begun to move. The realization came quietly, without announcement, without confirmation. But once it settled into the minds of those still awake, it could not be ignored. The doors had not been welded shut to protect anyone. They had been sealed to prevent something from getting out. And it was already inside with them. By the time night fully settled over the apartment complex, the building no longer felt like a place meant for people. It felt occupied. Not in the way it had always been, with residents moving behind doors and quiet lives unfolding in isolation, but in a deeper, more suffocating sense. Something had shifted within the structure itself, something that extended beyond walls and floors and into the space between them. The silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It carried weight. A low, almost imperceptible pressure that seemed to press against every surface, as though the air itself had thickened into something physical. The remaining residents felt it without understanding it. Doors were no longer left open. Lights remained on in every apartment. No one trusted the dark. But even with every light burning, shadows still gathered in corners where they should not have existed. The building did not respond to logic anymore. Time began to stretch. Hours felt longer than they should have, as if the natural rhythm of the outside world no longer applied within the sealed structure. Phones still displayed the correct time, but something about it felt wrong, disconnected, like a recording instead of a reality. The outside world had grown distant. Not physically but perceptually. Looking through the windows no longer provided reassurance. The streets beyond the glass appeared normal at first glance, but the longer anyone looked, the more unnatural they seemed. Movements outside felt delayed, slightly out of sync, like something replaying instead of happening in real time. People passing by never looked up, never reacted, never acknowledged the building. Inside, the changes continued. The walls had begun to shift more visibly now. What had once been subtle distortions had grown into undeniable formations beneath the surface. The paint stretched unevenly in places, bulging outward as if something pressed against it from the other side. Not breaking through, just testing the boundary. The first time someone touched one of those areas, they pulled their hand away immediately. The wall had felt warm. Not from heat, from something else. Something that responded. Word spread quickly, though no one spoke about it directly. The understanding passed silently between residents who avoided eye contact, who stayed inside their apartments but remained acutely aware that the space surrounding them was no longer stable. The second disappearance happened before midnight. This time, the absence was noticed almost immediately. An apartment door on the third floor stood open. The lights inside flickered faintly, casting uneven shadows across the hallway floor. Everything inside the apartment remained exactly as it should have been, except for the walls. They were no longer flat. The surfaces curved inward in certain places, forming shallow impressions that looked disturbingly precise. Human-shaped, as if something had pressed someone into the wall and slowly absorbed them. There were no marks, no damage, just the faint outline left behind. After that, no one left their apartments again. The building seemed to respond to movement, to attention, to awareness. The less anyone interacted with it, the quieter it became. But the quiet was temporary. Shortly after midnight, the power shifted. The lights didn't go out. They dimmed. All at once. Every bulb in every apartment lowered to the same faint intensity, casting the entire building in a dull, gray-blue glow. The air grew colder. Breath became visible. And the metallic smell returned stronger than before. But now it carried a distinct, undeniable presence. Something organic. Something that had once been alive. The walls began to move more openly. Slow expansions and contractions rippled through the hallways, subtle but continuous. The structure of the building adjusted itself in ways that no architecture should allow. Corners softened. Edges lost their sharpness. The straight lines that defined the apartments began to bend. Doors no longer sat perfectly within their frames. Some appeared slightly tilted. Others seemed deeper than before, as though the space behind them had expanded. Inside one apartment, a resident watched as the far wall slowly receded, stretching backward inch by inch into darkness that had not existed moments earlier. The room was changing size. Not collapsing. Not breaking. Reforming. The realization came gradually. The building was not deteriorating. It was reorganizing itself. Adapting. By early morning, the remaining residents had stopped trying to escape. The idea of leaving had become distant, almost irrelevant compared to the immediate reality surrounding them. The building had taken priority over everything else. Every sound, every movement, every shift in the walls demanded attention. The third disappearance did not leave an empty apartment. This time the door remained closed, but something inside it had changed. From the hallway, the door looked slightly different. Not damaged, not altered in any obvious way, but wrong. The surface of the wood appeared stretched, the grain pulled in unnatural directions as if the material had been reshaped from within. No one opened it. No one wanted to see what was on the other side. The building no longer needed to hide what it was doing. It had already begun. And by the time anyone understood it, it was too late. The walls continued to absorb, slowly, silently, without resistance. The final realization came not from what was seen, but from what was felt. The building was not consuming randomly. It was selective. It responded to awareness, to movement, to attention. Those who remained still lasted longer. Those who watched too closely did not. The structure seemed to recognize observation, to react to it, like something that understood it was being studied. By the second night, the number of remaining residents had dropped significantly. The hallways were empty, the apartments silent. Only a few lights remained on, and even those seemed dimmer than before. The building had grown quieter, more complete, more settled. Whatever it had been waiting for was nearly finished. By morning, the changes stopped. The walls became still again. The air stabilized. The metallic smell faded into something faint and distant. The lights returned to normal brightness. From the outside, the apartment complex looked exactly as it always had. Calm, ordinary, unremarkable. The metal plates still covered every exit. Seamless, permanent. But inside, the building had changed in a way that could not be undone. The apartments were no longer separate spaces. They were connected now. Not by hallways or doors, but by something deeper within the structure itself. The building was whole. And it was no longer empty. Because the residents had not disappeared. They had been integrated, pressed into the walls, stretched into the structure, absorbed into something that no longer needed to hide. And if anyone passed by the building that morning and looked closely through the windows, they might have noticed something subtle beneath the paint. Faint shapes, still, watching, from inside the walls. If a place suddenly closes itself off from the world, there is always a reason. Not everything that traps you is trying to keep danger out. Sometimes it's trying to keep something contained. So if you ever find yourself somewhere that feels sealed, watched, wrong, don't wait for answers. Because by the time you understand what's happening, you're already part of it. Subscribe for more stories that should have stayed hidden.